We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Chesam and Beis Mesecheet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 38b. On the previous summit, the Gemara said that according to Rabbi Akiva, the phrase Asher Lo Orasa is used for Gzeira Shava to compare Ones and Mefata in terms of the 50 shekel. That in both situations the payment of the Knas is going to be 50 shekel. And then the pasuk when it says Besula, that actually comes to exclude a Beula, meaning to say that a Besula receives the Knas payment, but not a Beula. And the Gemara now questions this and says, why don't we just reverse it? Ema besula l'gzeira shava. Why don't we say that the word besula, that's the one that's used for the gzeira shava to compare ones and mefata? As Rashi over here says, Ema besula l'gzeira shava v'lav l'me'ute beula. It's not include beula. V'hei knas l'beula. And if you'd say that, then a beula would receive a knas. V'asher lo orasa. And then we can say that the pasuk of asher lo orasa, prat l'nara shenisarsa v'niskarsha. That pasuk is coming to exclude a situation of a nara that was betrothed and was divorced. Meaning that pasuk is coming to say that in such a situation where she was already betrothed and then divorced, so there she would not receive the kanas payment. How do you know which pasuk is for the exclusion and which pasuk is for the gzeira shava? And the Gemara answers, Mistabra asher lo rasa l'gzeira shava. It makes more sense to say that asher lo rasa is used for the gzeira shava, as Rashi over here says, va'afilu orasa isla knas, and we'll say that the orasa still receives the knas payment. That makes more sense. Why? Sharei ani korei ba nara besula, because that way we can still refer to this girl as a nara besula. She's called a nara besula, and in the situation of asher lo orasa or orasa, in those situations, in both cases, she is still a nara besula, and therefore she receives the payment. As Rashi over here says, Shareani kore ba nara besula, afa pisha nisarsa v'nisgarsha, even though she was betrothed and divorced, she's still a nara besula. Da nara besula she is a nara besula, k'dichsiv kra, which is what the pasuk says. Avol beula she'einani kore ba nara besula, but a beula who cannot be referred to as a nara besula, ein la knas, so she will not receive the knas payment. But the Gemara says that doesn't make any sense. Adrab, on the contrary, you can make the exact opposite argument. Besula l'gzeira shava, use the word besula for gzeira shava. Sha'arei ani korei ba asher lo rasa, because then you can fulfill the pasuk of asher lo rasa. But you should exclude a situation where she is a rasa. And so finally the Gemara says, mistabra ho ishtani gufa, v'holo ishtani gufa. No, it makes more sense to say it the way we said it, because in one case her body has changed, meaning by a beula, she's had relations, her body has changed, therefore it makes sense that she would not receive the kanas payment in that case. But in the case where she had an erisin, so her body didn't change, and therefore she should still receive the payment. Rashi over here says, Mistabra arusa yesh la knas. It makes sense to say that the arusa gets the knas. Uva ein la, and a beula does not get knas. Why? To eshtani gufa, because a beula, her body has changed. Upigma in rav kolkach, the fact that she was raped, it doesn't create the same kind of pagam in her. It doesn't create the same lessening of her value, because she's already a beula, so she doesn't get the knas. But again, in the case of nisarsa and niskarsha, her body has not yet changed. She doesn't have a pagam already, so to speak, and therefore she receives the knas payment. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yossi Haglili Haisvara Minale, Rav Yossi Haglili, who does not have Asher Lo Orasa for a Gzeira Shava. How does he know this idea? Rashi over here says, Hasvara, the Chamishim Kesef the Ones Shkolim. And how does he know that the 50 Kesef by Ones refers to Shkolim? The Kesef Yishkol de Mefata Yehu Chamishim. And how does he know the Kesef Yishkol by Mefata, which we know is Shkolim? But how does he know that it's 50 shekel? Where does he learn that from if he does not have the pasuk of Asher Lo Orasa? And to that the Gemara says, Nafkalei Midatanya. He learns it out from the following Brisa. The Brisa says Kesef Yishkol Kimor HaBesulos. By Mefata again it says Kesef Yishkol Kimor HaBesulos. Now Rashi over here says Kimor HaBesulos means Minyan HaMefurish Eitzel Ones. That's the number that's given by rape. The Hainu Chamishim, which is 50, that's the Moar HaBesulos. So the Kesef Yishkol should be Kimor HaBesulos, meaning to say Sheyehezeh Kimor HaBesulos, that this should be like Moar HaBesulos, or Moar HaBesulos Kazeh, and Moar HaBesulos should be like this. As Rashi over here says Kimor HaBesulos, meaning this case over here should be Kimor HaBesulos. That means to say, again, like we just read, that's the 50 that applies to the case of Mefata, just like it applies by the case of Ones. Umar HaBesulos, and the other way as well. The case by Ones should be Yushkolim, should be Shkolim Kazet, just like this case by Mefata, Shekasav Bo Yishkol, where it says the word Yishkol. You compare the fact that it says Shekel by Mefata, that should be true by Ones, and the number 50, which is by Ones, should be true by Mefata. And the Gemara continues, Kasha de Rabbi Akiva. In any case, on the previous summit, don't we have a contradiction within the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? As Rashi over here says, Kasha de Rabbi Akiva de Braisa damar konsoli avia. Rabbi Akiva of the Braisa said, if you have a situation of a Narash and Isarsa v'nisgarsha, the Knas goes to her father. Ad Rabbi Akiva de Masnisin, that's a contradiction to Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah, who says that the Knas goes to her. And the Gemara answers to that, Shrei Tanoi v'aliba de Rabbi Akiva. There are two Tanoim according to Rabbi Akiva. There's a machlokus exactly what Rabbi Akiva holds. And the Gemara continues, B'shalom Rabbi Akiva de Masnisin. I understand Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah. Again, Rabbi Akiva said that in a situation of the Narash and Isarsav and Isgarsha, she receives the Knas payment. That makes sense. Lo asi gzeir shava umifkale lekrami pashte legamri. So the gzeir shava of Asher lo ras is not going to come and totally undo the simple meaning of the pasuk. Meaning, according to Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, you can still understand the pasuk simply to mean that in a case where she was betrothed, so then she actually receives the payment instead of her father. It doesn't mean to say Asher lo rasa, that if she's betrothed, she gets nothing. It means that Asher lo ras, if she's not betrothed, the payment goes to her father. Coming to exclude, if she's betrothed, then she receives the payment. In other words, according to Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, there is a way to understand the simple reading of the pasuk that fits. Elul Rabbi Akiva de Braisa, but according to Rabbi Akiva of the Braisa, who says that it doesn't matter if she was betrothed or she was not betrothed, it makes no difference. In both cases, the payment goes to her father. So Asi Gzeir Shava mifkami pashte legamri. So the Gzeir Shava comes along and undoes the simple explanation of the pasuk. The simple explanation of the pasuk is that only if she was never betrothed is the payment made, but otherwise there's no payment whatsoever. And now we have no other way to understand the pasuk. We're just using it as a gzeir shava, and instead we're saying that the payment is received by the father in both cases. So we're completely not using the simple explanation of the pasuk according to Rabbi Akiva of the Braisa. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Kari be Asher lo arusa. Instead of reading the pasuk of Asher lo orasa, the pasuk should be read as Asher lo arusa. That right now she's not betrothed, meaning to say, in a situation where right now she was betrothed and she was raped while she was betrothed, so there's going to be no payment. But in a situation where she was betrothed and divorced, that would be the case again of Rabbi Akiva. So in that case, according to Rabbi Akiva in the Braisa, the payment will be made and the payment will go to the father. The Gemara says, Arusa baskilahi. 1 second. If it means to say that an Arusa is excluded from the payment, but of course an Arusa he doesn't need to pay, because if a person rapes an Arusa, then that's a situation where he's going to get skila. And if there's the death penalty, of course you don't pay. So why would we need a pasuk to tell us that if she's an Arusa, he doesn't pay? And the Gemara says, no, you do need the pasuk, because Salkadai Tachamina, I might have thought, Hoel v'chidash hu shechid shatora b'knas, since by a situation of knas, this is a situation of a fine, and a fine in general is a chiddush. So I might have thought, afagav de miktal mishalim, that even though there is a death penalty involved, maybe still he needs to pay. And so therefore the pasuk is telling us, no, if she's an arusa, he doesn't pay. But the Gemara continues, Ula Rabba Diyamar, but what about according to Rabba, who says, Chiddush hu shechid shator b'knas afagav de miktal mishalim? He says that in fact it is true, that when you have a situation of knas, since it is a chiddush, therefore it's possible to have the death penalty and pay the payment. So you can't say that the reason the pasuk says is arusa is because I might have thought this idea that it's a knas you pay. On the contrary, Rabba says that in general, by a situation of knas, you do pay, even though there's a death penalty. So again, what are you going to do with this pasuk of Asher lo orasa according to Rabba? Ma'ikol Lememra, what are you going to do with the pasuk? And to that, the Gemara says, Savarlak Rabbi Akiva de Masnis. And you'll have to say, according to Rabba, that Rabba holds like Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah, meaning to say that Rabbi Akiva holds by a situation of Nisarsa Vinizgarsha, the payment goes to her, and therefore you can interpret the pasuk of Asher lo orasa to mean that Asher lo orasa, then the payment goes to her father. But if she was Nisarsa Vinizgarsha, then the payment goes to her. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Kenasa Lemi, who does the Knas payment go to? Liavia, the Tanakama says it goes to her father. V'yesh omrim la'atzman, some people say it goes to her. Now the Gemara at this point thinks that we're talking about a regular situation of Knas, and so the Gemara asks, Li'atzma amai, so why should it go to her? Of course it should go to her father. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Chisda says, Hacha bin Narash and Isarsav and Iskarsha Askinon. Again, we're talking about the situation of a Nara who was betrothed and divorced. That's the case over here in this Braisa. V'kamiflagi beplugsa de Rabbi Akiva de Masnisin, Rabbi Akiva de Braisa. And the machlokus over here in the Braisa is exactly the same machlokus within Rabbi Akiva. In other words, in a situation of a Narash and Isarsav and Iskarsha, where according to Rabbi Akiva there is a payment, but who does the payment go to? Again, Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah said that the payment goes to her. Rabbi Akiva in the Braisa said the payment still goes to her father. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Ba'alev Mesa. Let's say you have a situation where he had relations with her. Again, this is talking about a case of onus, and then she dies. So in such a situation, Potter, he is Potter from making the payment. Shanamar, like the Pasuk says, V'nosan la'avia hanara. It says you have to pay the father of the Nara. V'lo la'avi Mesa. You don't pay the father of the woman who died, and therefore, if she dies, there is no payment. Rashi over here says, Ba'alev Mesa lo hispik ha'avla hamido b'din ad shemesa. The father didn't get a chance to take this person to court until she died, and so again the question over here is, does he have to make the payment? And Abai is saying in such a situation the pasuk says avi hanara velo lavi mesa, and therefore he does not need to make the payment. And the Gemara continues, milsa depshita leili Abaya mi boy leila Rava. This idea, which to Abaya seemed obvious, was actually a question according to Rava. The boy Rava, because Rava asked, yesh beggar bekever o ein beggar bekever. Is the halacha of beggar, let's say she becomes an adult, does that apply if she has died, or does that not apply if she died? Yesh beggar bekever. Is there a din of beggar bekever, and therefore the payment would go to her son? Odilmor, maybe ain't beggar bekever. There's no din of beggar by a kever. Udiavia have, and the payment goes to her father. Rashi over here explains. Yesh beggar bekever mesa ben arusa ad shalom de bedin. Let's say the case again is she was raped, and then she dies while she's a nara. There was no court case yet. V'higi azman bagrusa bekever, and now it comes the time for her adulthood, but she's already died. Michasha beggar olo, is she considered to be an adult or not? So the Gemara is going to explain for what practical difference does this make. It means to say as follows: Yesh beggar bekever. On the one hand, we could say she does have the din of a bogeres. There's a halacha. Let's say he doesn't take the guy to court, and then she becomes a bogeres and she's alive. So tanan lekamon beperek narish and espat that we learn in the Mishnah later on. If the court case takes place when she's a bogeres, she actually receives the payment and not her father. So now also beggar bekever, even though she is dead, but she's still at the age of a bogeres. Mafkia koach, we would say that the strength of the father is taken away. Uveno yarislam yesh laben, and if she has a son, the son is the one who's going to receive the payment. That would be the tzad of yesh beggar bekever. Or the other way is no, there is no din of bogeres by the kever, and therefore the payment would go to her father. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph.